So I give the floor to the Minister of Economy, Civil Service and Communications of Fiji, Mr. Aiyaz Sayed-Khaiyum. You have the floor, sir.
The citizens of small states did not choose to be those who suffer the most from global disasters we did not cause. And as the leaders, keeping and protecting our people's lives and livelihoods is no less of a choice. It is our duty. Fiji was the first nation in the world to sign the Paris Agreement. Since then, 13 cyclones have wiped out one half of our GDP, the equivalent of $13 trillion loss to the US economy. The COVID-19 pandemic, from which we are now recovering, decimated the livelihoods of over 100,000 Fijians and erased a fifth of our economy. And Russia's war in Ukraine, as mentioned earlier on, has created a food and fuel price crisis that will continue to exploit our vulnerabilities as an island economy. Combined, these crises would have driven hundreds of thousands of Fijians into destitution. We've not let that happen. We've used every fiscal resource we could muster to respond and reset course towards the 2030 agenda. Any responsible leader would do the same. Yet we and other vulnerable nations are being punished for it by a system of debt architecture that is never built to serve our needs. The global financial system serves as a secure foundation for wealthy countries in times of crisis, but its cracks can swallow developing nations. The smaller we are, the further we can fall. Developing countries on average spend 5 times more than developed countries to service their borrowings, often to respond to crises we did not cause. We, the victims, suffer more and pay more to the same system that rewards the perpetrators with cheap finance. That is the fundamental injustice at the heart of our global debt architecture. And if there is a moral hazard of relevance in this conversation on global finance, that is it. We know how we got there. The architects of our financial system chose to perpetrate the centuries-old model that exploited their soon-to-be castle colonies. And now, rather than building for the future, developing nations are consistently repaying debts under a system designed to serve those old dynamics of power and to ignore or underprice the growing impacts of climate change. This isn't the 1940s. We are not colonies anymore. We are self-determined nations. And ignoring our vulnerabilities only worsens the consequences for us in the entire market economy. Small states' realities, contexts, and affairs were recognized and written into the rules of a global financial system if we stand any chance at realizing the SDGs. There are lessons we can take from the past 2 years. Nations that could access finance quickly in response were empowered to recover faster from the pandemic's economic constrictions. While we had to borrow hundreds of millions of dollars, Fiji successfully negotiated low-cost loans and attracted development assistance. We are grateful to our development partners for their trust in our financial management, as shown through their direct budgetary support. Now our recoveries are empowering us forward. But the fact remains that some 10% of Fiji's debt burden is owed to climate disasters alone. As the scale of these disasters increases, so must our access to concessional finance. And while Fiji's debts are sustainable under any lens of analysis, we find serious fault with these outdated assessments. The debt to GDP ratio, for example, is too crude a tool to analyze the complexity of this issue. The cost of debt is changing. So why isn't our thinking? Is it still debt? If terms are so concessional that much of it becomes a grant by the time it is paid, you don't actually borrow a grant. Most importantly, we have shown we know how to strategically use the finance available to us. We are building back better, bluer, greener, and even closer collaboration with the private sector and in line with the SDGs. In 2018, we became the first emerging economy to issue a sovereign green bond. We're strengthening climate resilience across our entire infrastructure network, relocating communities and harnessing nature to protect our people. Through the SDG Fund and UN CDF, we're leveraging private finance to protect reefs and build resilient coastal ecosystems. And we're funding more ocean action through a blue bond issuance later this year. We are repurposing entire sectors through sustainability, including in tourism, to prioritize nature, conservation, and climate action. We are retooling our security forces around the operational focus of climate security through our work with development partners to create the world's first climate catastrophe response force. There's more we can do. If we stand any chance at turning this lost decade into one of action, indeed there's more we must do. Climate vulnerable countries should be empowered to continue becoming centers for innovation. Big global solutions always start small, and they can start indeed with us. Fiji supports calls for the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to explore and purpose well-structured debt for nature swaps or other structural financing changes. We urge the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and other multilateral institutions to ensure that eligibility for their climate-related programs and funding is based on our climate vulnerability and not on our OECD income status. And lastly, we call on MDBs to take a more nuanced and sophisticated approach to their assessments of debt sustainability rather than rely on oversimplistic and increasingly irrelevant metrics. Small states may not have chosen our circumstances, but we refuse to have our future chosen for us. We deserve a voice in the long-awaited reform of the world's debt architecture. First, the world must choose also, of course, to hear us. Thank you. Vinaka.
Thank you, Minister, for a wonderful statement and also for pointing out the importance of talking about the multi-dimensional vulnerability index that also the Prime Minister of Grenada pointed out, going beyond the income status and the different instruments that can be used precisely to lower the burden of these countries on climate change, like the green and blue bonds, but also the debt for nature possibilities that we have ahead. So thank you really very much.